Welcome back to another edition of Community Conversations. I am Mike Parker with the D Language Foundation, and I am joined today by Adam Wilson, a longtime member of the D community, and for the last year or more, a regular attendee of the core monthly meetings and heading up the Phobos V3 project. Thanks for joining me, Adam.
Good to be with you, Mike.
So we are going to start today, not with D, not with Phobos, but we're going to rewind a little bit, take you back to how you got into programming. What got you going? Was it an early bug you caught, or did it come late?
Well, if you were to ask my mother, it started when I was about 10 months old.
Very early.
She has this picture of me sitting on my dad's lap, hammering away on his Apple IIe keyboard, apparently producing absolute nonsense. Obviously, not much else happened. But then when I was about 12 years old, my school was one of the first to get like an entire computer lab full of PCs. This would be back in 1993, roughly. And I was bored, waiting for my mother to come pick me up, as one does. Sat down to the computer, scrolled through all the applications. I knew what most of them were, but there was one I didn't recognize, and that would have been Visual Basic 5. Pulled it up, started running through the examples, which I think built kind of like a Notepad clone. And then one of the teachers walked by and said, "Hey, I'm teaching a class next quarter or semester on how to use this thing. Do you want to take it?" Sure. Sounds like fun. Mom's late a lot anyway. So took that class. Within a year, I was writing. I wasn't quite up to database apps, but I was starting to learn how to do those kinds of things. Then by the time we get to 14 years old, teaching myself C++, just what I can find on the internet. So this is obviously before C++ 2003, or this is very old C++. It's very different than what anybody who writes C++ today would recognize. But I actually was able to leverage all of that extracurricular activity into going to college early. So my state has a program called Running Start, where if you can test into college, you can start at college at 16. I went, tested out of the Visual Basic class, because by this point, I've been programming Visual Basic for 4 years. Walked into the dean, showed him stuff I'd built, and he went, "Yeah, you don't need this class." And that's where I got my start.
What kind of stuff were you doing with Visual Basic?
My fascination was always with games, but I kind of very quickly realized that Visual Basic wasn't up to it. You learn about blitting and frame buffer copies, and you can do that stuff in Visual Basic, but because at the time, Visual Basic 6, when I was learning this, it was an interpreted language. It was, it had this fat runtime hanging off the end of it, and it wasn't really built for that kind of work. And so I very quickly moved over to C++, and there was this book that my mother liked to go to used bookstores. And so I found this. It was one of those dummies books, but it was like Intro to Windows Game Programming for Dummies. And at the end of the book, you actually build it's like a scrolling shooter, like where you're flying around. And I built all the way through that. And at this time, I'm getting ready to go to college. And so, of course, the college I'm going to actually has a specific game development program. I sign up for that, tried to build, we actually got most of the way, a strategy game based on Halo. If you remember that game. That was an interesting project. For whatever reason, people keep electing me as leaders of things. And so I got elected leader of that group. And one of my very early memories of being frustrated with another human being was on that project, because this guy basically spent 6 weeks out of a 10-week course. He had found somewhere on the internet you could write an event handler in C++ with templates such that the thing compiled down to like one function call, and it would do all this crazy stuff with, like dispatch, but there were no virtual function calls in it at all. And he was just absolutely fascinated by this. And I'm like, that's great, guy. Like, we're going to have the fastest events on the planet in this game, but I got a game to write for this class. So there were three of us on that team, and we actually did turn something in, and the profs did like it. It had all the elements of a game. You had to, move around a map. You had enemies that would come at you. I mean, not very well because we didn't have all that much time. We had multiple levels and victory conditions. So,
well, were you exposed to any other languages while you were there at school?
the only other language I was exposed to was C# because they had a dedicated game certificate program, and they had a bunch of, I mean, these were some sharp dudes, but they're all C++ programmers. So like the entire faculty was C++ profs. The C# stuff came in because I was able to test out of a lot of classes. I would walk in and say, okay, here's what I've done. Can I just skip this class and move on to something else? And there was one class where the prof never took a class from him before, never took a class from him again. But, I'm showing him all this work I've done in all these different languages, C++, Visual Basic, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of it. And it was a web programming class. And he goes, no, you have to take the whole class. The same three friends from the game project, we sat in back of the class and we goofed off like the whole time. We goofed off. We got in trouble more than once. I mean, all three of us could have tested out of that class. We actually ended up working on, I think that quarter, we also had our capstone game project going. So we just spent the whole time working on that because we could go home, knock out the homework in an hour and just pass. And that was one of my highest graded classes that I had. It was like a 3.9 or something like that out of 4.
Did you develop any interest in C# at that time, or was it just, did you just kind of dismiss it? Because I know C# became a major part of your life later on.
No, I actually did develop quite an interest in C#. So my progression, it was Visual Basic, C++. Mm-hmm. But I found C++ very laborious to work in. But I actually liked the syntax better because if you remember Visual Basic 6, you've got private sub, or private function, and then you've got end function, and you've got if, and you've got end if, and there's all this typing, where brackets, click, click, right? And you've got both of them. So I loved the terseness of C++ in terms of the syntax, but you're just sitting there writing all this, pointer dereference. Oh, got to remember to delete here. And so with C#, I could get all of the terseness without any of the stuff that I kept forgetting to do and leaking memory all over the place. As far as C++ goes, for me, it was a bit of a bridge to other things. I never really worked with it all that much. There is one point later in my career where it was great that I knew it. That's a bit of a story unto itself.
Was there anything that stands out at your time in the school? Aside from these projects you're describing, was there one like major lesson that you learned that you took away that helped you later on?
School was mostly a lot of little lessons. And it was, looking back, it was a lot of little lessons on how to deal with people. School did a lot of, projects where you had to work with other people. And, we're all a bunch of engineers. Other people are annoying. Computers are not annoying, right? It was good that I was able to do that. But if I had to say that there was one class that really stood out and actually changed the way I thought about software because, as you're progressing, you're learning how to write code and you're learning all the details. But at some point you have to get bigger. You have to be able to integrate all of these tools you've got into an actual cohesive project. For me, that project was actually, or it wasn't really a project, it was a class. It was the software testing class. I had written a program that was written in Visual Basic .NET at this point, and it was in use at a business. it had bugs, and we knew it had bugs. And the prof, very cool guy, he says, I've got this piece of software. I know where all the bugs are in it, but if any of you all have any software you've written and you'd like us to test it, we'd be happy to get you set up so that you can go ahead and we can use your project for the class. And I put my hand up and I said, yeah, I think I've got something. Brought it in, showed him. I had to show him because it's a testing class. He wanted to see, okay, what the bugs were. But it was in that class where we were not doing any software development. We were just trying to break things, that I started to see that all those decisions that I had made in the name of expediency to build the software and how they had contributed to all the problems we had with it. That was when I started to integrate and understand, okay, it's not just that I am using the best tool for the job. It's that I am using the best tool for the job in the way that it's designed to be used, but also in the way that solves the problem with the least amount of not just effort, but future problems. It wasn't necessarily learning about testing itself that really sort of got me. Mm-hmm. It was being forced to reflect back on my work and see how the choices I had made had led me to the problems that I had.
Well, that's an interesting thought there, because, I think there is this kind of gray area there where if you use a tool in a way it wasn't intended to be used, on the one hand, you're opening the door to unexpected, potentially massive problems. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, you're potentially pushing the boundaries and and setting a path for improvement and enhancement and all this other stuff. And one thing, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but one thing where this really applies, I think, is BetterC in the D language.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because that was intended as a way to ease porting C code 2D, to ease integrating D libraries into existing C projects, that kind of thing. But people use it as their go-to. I mean, it's the thing they reach for first for their new projects, and then they run into walls along the way because they're using it in a way it wasn't intended to be used. And
then they come into the Discord and complain about it.
Right. And so that's created this tension now where, they're pushing and we're getting changes more. The scope of BetterC has somewhat changed, but yeah, that's an interesting dilemma, an interesting little gray area to be in. How do you know when you're digging a hole and when you're exploring new frontiers?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a solid answer for everyone watching on that one. I don't, but one of the things I've learned over the years is that the problem isn't trying stuff. Mm-hmm. The problem is getting married to things and married to ideas. If was it DConf 2014, I think, and at Facebook, and they had on the wall, painted on the wall, move fast and break things. And I was like, well, I can't really afford to break things because then the whole business goes dead. Well, I lived through that, and it's like, okay, so maybe I move too fast, right? Because you can move too fast, in my opinion. And that is just my opinion. At the same time, breaking things isn't inherently wrong, and all humans are flawed and will make mistakes. So we have to accept that. And occasionally you're going to discover something really cool. So don't beat yourself up too badly about it, is really what I would say. Let yourself explore, let yourself create. And if something looks like it might be interesting, but it's not really going to be relevant, just cut yourself off and go back to what you need to be doing.
Post education, did you jump into a professional programming slot immediately, or was there a gap?
Not only was there no gap, I actually do not even have a formal degree because I was already working in programming at the time. So I had built that same software package that I built for that business. I kept working for them. We just kept going on that. They just kept paying me to keep doing that. And eventually I was just like, you know what? There was a series of classes that was only offered. It was Calculus 1 in fall, calculus 2 in winter, calculus 3 in spring, and they only ever offered them. So I was going to have to go do a whole nother year basically
Mm.
just to get these last 3 classes. I've never been very good at higher level math. Fun little side story. There's a reason why I'm really, really into async await and multi-threaded programming, because
Mm.
it drives mathematicians nuts. and and I describe it as I've got 4 different equations, and you're solving each equation at the same time, and you're solving them all in a different order. And then magically at the end of that, the right answer pops out the far side. And the mathematicians look at me like I grew multiple heads, as I'm explaining this to them. But that's kind of what multi-threading is. So I just kept working, and we kept rolling. They had lots of work to do. So I just looked at it
Mm.
and said, I can continue paying the college, or I can just go to work and spend the money on something else, like a
So,
car.
so that was Visual Basic, yeah, that project.
Yeah, it started as Visual Basic, but by the time we get to 2000, I want to say 2010, I'm starting to integrate C Sharp into it, because they're both .NET, so you can do that.
Okay, so what prompted that?
I just like C Sharp better, and when a new project came up, I think I had to rewrite the printing, like the actual physical printing, and I'm like, nope, I'm not doing this in VB. That sucked the first time.
Mm.
I'm going to do this in C Sharp. And eventually I just kept writing all the new stuff in C Sharp. And I mean, to this day, there is still Visual Basic code. And oh, I did something this year that I am so not proud of, and I love it at the same time. So I started working with .NET in beta 1. So
Mm.
this would be 2001. This is the first beta that ever dropped. The Visual Basic version that we used to start that project was Visual Basic 1, or Visual Basic .NET 1. And as a result, there was no database access.
Mm.
There was no database access library at all. You had to use the one from VB6, which I knew. And they use something called a primary interop assembly, and it has all these weird rules, and it's ugly, but it was the only way to do it. And so the very core of the initial version of the program was written with that. And then earlier this year, I finally figured out a way to use a modern database access library. And it took me, I actually did it in a 12-hour session, just one day, just ran through it. And I carefully pulled it out and put a new one in.
So you're still maintaining the same project?
I am, to this
Oh,
day.
wow, that's quite a long track record there.
2000, the first code was laid down in summer of 2003. So
Wow,
22
awesome.
years.
Nice. Not tired of it.
Oh, well, there's
That's another
aspects of
story.
that code base. There's aspects, but no, I'm not tired of it. I've always stuck with projects for a long time. I've been with D now since 2011, September of 2011.
Yeah, that was my next question I was going to get to. Yeah, so we've answered that one. Yeah. Well, I was going to get to it by way of, what were you doing in your spare time?
More programming. Like,
yeah.
I just couldn't get enough of this stuff.
Mm.
In 2011 specifically, and there's a reason for this. Up until then, I was messing around with C++. I had Visual Studio. I had the Visual C++ compiler, was always interested in games. I did some very, very basic coding work for a game that is now on Steam. I doubt they're using a shred of what I wrote, but that was all, of course, C++. They were working with the Unreal Engine at the time. I was doing all this stuff, but I kept having to get paid. I kept working on this project because they were paying. The other thing that kind of happened in there was, I've always been really interested in aviation since I was a little boy. There's a TV show called Wings. We had to watch that every day because that was just something I loved watching. Part of that might be because my dad is also a licensed pilot. So, and in about late 2006, this would be late summer 2006, I go start flight school. I get my private pilot's license in one of the lowest times. It's not quite the record, but I was very close to getting the record for the shortest amount of time to get a private pilot's license. I said, hey, this is really cool. I'd like to actually do this for a living. Got really serious about it in 2007. I was still working on that project, but I kind of put down all the extracurricular programming in 2007. And I just roll through all the different certificates. You've got to do your instrument certificate. So I got my private certificate in February of 2007. My very first flight as a licensed private pilot, I decide that what I really need to do is become a test pilot for Cessna. And I go out and get caught in a windstorm. So that was fun. And then I say, you know what? I should go get my instrument rating because that sucked. How can I avoid that? I get all that done, go through, do my multi engine commercial. I'm on the way to becoming a certified flight instructor. We get to about May of 2008. And yes, that year matters. Uh, and the school looks at me and says, hey, look, dude, you have met all the other requirements for your commercial. You just need 50 more hours because you need to get your commercial license. You have to have 250 hours. And they said, okay, you can either go and fly circles over the airport for 50 hours, or is there a trip you'd like to take? And I said, well, I don't want to, do circles for 50 hours. So my dad and I flew across the country. The picture that is on my Discord of me reading my avatar was taken on that trip. I believe that picture was taken over Smyrna, Tennessee. Again, it was that idea of don't be afraid to experiment, try new things. And I have carried that even to this day, where I am now occasionally involved in conversations with flight instructors about ways to improve pilot training.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to derail the conversation because I could rant on that for hours.
Yeah, that's like Walter.
Walter and I at Red Robin.
I can imagine.
We all say, come to Red Robin. We're going to talk about D, but about once or twice a year, it turns into the airplane show at Red Robin.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, this is something Walter Bright, the creator of the D language, he has these monthly, I guess, meetups.
Yep.
In Seattle at the Red Robin, and D enthusiasts in the area are welcome to join if you want to hear Walter and Adam go on about airplanes and piloting.
Not every time. Not every time, I swear.
It. So, okay. So this try new things attitude, is that what brought you into D in 2011?
No.
Although
that would be very cool if it was.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys recall, but in 2011 was kind of an interesting year for Microsoft. That was the year that Windows 8 was announced.
Oh, okay.
With its brand new UI and all of that. And I was actually happened to be in the main auditorium at Build 2011 in August that year. I got to see everything that they were going, they were talking about this and we're doing that, Jason Zander was the guy who was leading up the new UI for Windows 8. It was that silly tile-based UI that kind of looked like it was for kids. Towards the end of the conversation, the crowd was quiet, but you know how crowd, this is like 5,000 people or something like that. They can get this kind of restlessness. You can hear these kind of hushed conversations going on because it was at that somewhere in that keynote that they announced that they were going to be canceling Silverlight. And so Silverlight is a technology you could write .NET and then as a browser plugin, it would run it.
Yeah, it was it was the Microsoft Flash, right?
It was, yeah. And without the security holes, Silverlight did need to go away. But at the time I was like, they're killing Silverlight. That's like a key .NET, tent pole. Oh no, are they going to kill .NET? Because part of what had been announced with Windows 8 was this brand new programming model. We now call it UWP. It was called something else at the time. It was actually a really cool API. It was these XML files that you could parse them and then any language that could do a CFFI, you could generate bindings to these things. And D actually has those now. But it was an attempt by Windows to replace the Win32 API. And it was going to have all this new user interface stuff, of course, because it's it's for writing these tablet-based programs. And of course, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I just started investing in WPF. They're going to kill. Are they going to kill that too? So I was like, okay, are they going to kill everything that
Mm.
I'm using? I need to find something that is not Microsoft at all.
Ah, hmm.
Up to this point, throughout my entire programming career, from the day I sat down at a programming language, my first day of Visual Basic 5 up until August of 2011, I was Microsoft 110%. Like that's
Hmm.
all I ever did. And then this hits, and it's like, oh no, like they might take away my toys. Of course, they didn't, but they did go off and build .NET Core, which actually really cool. And I said, look, I want a C style language that has a garbage collector because I remembered C++ and all the trouble I had with manual memory management. Like I just don't want to do that. So where is a language that is natively compiled, multiple operating systems and architectures, has a garbage collector runtime, and a decent standard library. I'll be honest, in 2011, I had to give up on my standard library dreams for D a little bit. it I'm not holding anything against D, but it was kind of like, well, I need something that isn't Microsoft that had, and the runtime and garbage collector were more important to me. So
So how did you find D?
Google.
Google.
I I kid you not. I just started poking around by typing queries into Google, and out popped, yeah, here's this D programming language.
What did you use it for in the beginning? How did you dip your toes into the water?
I was big into trying to build shared libraries that I could call from C sharp. I wanted a language that I could write a game engine in and then call that game engine from C sharp. D offered almost all of that. Of course, as we now know from the big merge we did from Reiner at the end of 2023, that D had some more work to go on shared library support at the
Yeah,
time.
right.
But once I got started with it, I started realizing that it had utility outside of that. It was actually because of D that I got into Linux. Until like 2015 or 16, my primary interest in D was mostly around graphics programming.
Did you pick it up just from the website or?
There was an IRC channel
Yes.
back then.
Yes.
And I've always been big on that sort of more interactive communication.
You learned the language that way just by asking questions in IRC?
Yeah, I mean, to some, I did read a lot of the website documentation, and that's kind of how I'd always learned languages.
Yeah.
I learned Visual Basic that way. I learned C++ that way. I learned C sharp that way. I mean, C sharp was actually really easy to pick up because it was the same .NET libraries. So everything made sense. It was just, oh, different syntax. And so D was kind of like, oh, well, again, the syntax was very similar to C sharp. So learning curve wise, my very first DConf talk was 2013, was really just a list of things I had encountered moving from C sharp to D. I tried to do this in C sharp, and here's how you do that in D. C sharp at the time had just gotten something called LINQ, Language Integrated Query. So I was like, oh, SG.algorithms. Here's the mapping of algorithms to do this and that. And that's actually the turning point of my D career away from the graphics side of things and into the more serious like utilities, libraries, stuff like that.
Yeah. So what prompted you to go to DConf 2013? That's where I first met you in person.
What prompted me to go was Walter. So Walter and I live in the same region. Back in 2012, we were meeting fairly regularly at Red Robin. Andre would show up, Eric Niebler would show up, Bartaj would show up, and we would have these just rousing and wildly challenging, at least for me, conversations. Because, those guys, they are way, way up there in terms of skill. I'm an average programmer. Those guys, they are something else. But so I was just listening, and, I didn't know that DConf was coming up. I wasn't really paying attention to it. I was busy working. And Walter just said, "Hey, if you come give a talk about your, experience with D, then we'll pay for it." I said, "Okay, Walter, the only thing I can talk about is my experience coming from C sharp to D." And he's like, "Yes, I want that talk."
That was my first time meeting pretty much everybody face to
Hmm.
face. I remember the excitement leading up to it,
Yes.
and the just the idea that, wow, D has finally arrived. That's what it felt like. We've got our own conference, and even if it was kickstarted, I mean, it was there. But then the other thing, all these people that I had been interacting with online for a few years, and now I finally got to see them face to face, and that today is still my favorite part of DConf is
Yes. Yes.
seeing people face to face.
I have missed a number of decomps over the years, and
Mm,
that is the thing I miss about it.
mhm,
Is I mean, the talks have actually been fantastic quality,
mhm.
but the real reason I come is for the conversations.
What led to your interest in Phobos?
Today I have code that's running in production, and I've always been a libraries guy. I've written lots of libraries for C sharp. I have published libraries on NuGet that other people use. I love the concept of modularity and, taking a piece of code that is reusable and making it so that I can reuse it. I
Mhm,
love that stuff. The standard library is about as highly leveraged a library as one can possibly get. It wasn't really Phobos in particular, but over the past over the years leading up to my involvement with Phobos, I had always been interested in trying to build libraries for D. They were always libraries that I needed to do to get things done. So one of the libraries I built that I'm actually really proud of is a library called SecureD. It's a cryptography library, kind of, because most crypto libraries say, here is a menu of crypto choices, pick one, pray you get the implementation right, and off you go. SecureD came from an idea that I actually saw in .NET many, many years before this by a guy named Scott Draper.
mhm.
And he wrote a library called Inferno. And he's a security crypto guy. And he said, look, we need to stop giving programmers this dizzying array of options that they have no idea what they're doing with or what to pick. Pick a sensible choice and write the correct algorithm around them, around that sensible choice. That is what security is. If you want to encrypt a file, you just pass it the file bytes and pass it a key. All the correct algorithms, all the correct methods of making sure that the password is hashed properly and all the header information, all of that's taken care of for you. I've always been interested in crypto, uh, but more from an engineering standpoint, less about the math, but more how can I make something actually secure. Right now, I'm working on Z standard stuff because
Mm.
compression has come up in a big way for my work. We've recently started taking these giant multi megabyte JSON files and stuffing them over the wire. So compression has come up a big way. And that led me to import C. While I love the idea of import C, and I really love what it can do for D, like what I was working on this weekend before we filmed this was Walter and I and Dennis were crushing bugs in import C. Just as a fun aside, I don't know if you saw my post on the forums earlier today. DMD 2.111, the import C bindings for ODBC will be shipping. So we are now dog fooding
Oh,
import
cool.
C in our own bindings.
Nice.
So,
Yeah, I know you started
but
working on that at like DConf a couple years ago. Yeah.
2023, yeah. Back then, import C wasn't quite up to the task, but now it has gotten to the point where it is up to the task, and so pushed it through. We got it through. And the reason I'm detouring through import C is because, well, there's lots of great C libraries out there. The interfaces suck compared to what we can do with D. Looking at the direction that programming languages are going today, large standard libraries appear to be the thing. That appears to be the direction that the industry is moving. That kind of makes sense. 30 years ago, it, it it made a little more sense to roll your own library for everything because you needed to be able to tune it for exactly what you were doing, or you needed to do it in a specific way for what you were doing. But I think, particularly in the web era, we need to be focusing a lot more on standardized stuff. So HTTP, JavaScript, and for D, JSON. Okay, well, if we're going to start talking about JSON and HTTP, those are the kind of those kind of standards are the things that standard libraries can and should handle for languages. And most languages now have kind of a default HTTP client, at least. Uh, all of them have some sort of standardized SQL database access. D doesn't, which is part of why I was working on the ODBC bindings. Is I have a half-baked library built on top of those bindings, and there was stuff that was out of date and was missing versus the new ones. So I was like, hey, it'd be really cool to get semi-structured data out of SQL because like Postgres, SQL Server, both support JSON data in their data stores now. And ODBC has this new API where you can actually work with the structured data coming out of those. It was stuff like that. And so now I'm kind of looking at it going, well, it'd be really great to get a library similar to JDBC or ADO.NET into Phobos because SQL database access is part and parcel of working with an enormous number of systems these days. So, it's that kind of stuff. I don't know that Phobos is going to get all that way with 3. I'm not making any promises or anything. The library that I'm working on is half baked. It's not there yet, but that's sort of where my head is and why I got interested in working on Phobos.
Now we've got this project Phobos v3 rolling along. Were you there in the beginning with that when that was getting off
No.
the ground with Walter? Walter brought you in.
If you go back to 2012, 2011, D was these meetups at Red Robin. Those kind of petered out as people like Eric and Andre, they all just kind of moved away. Okay. So we stopped going to Red Robin because there just weren't enough of us. We rolled into the C++ users group for years and years and years. And it's only in the past couple of years that we've actually popped out and started going back to Red Robin. Because what we would do is we would go to a bar after the C++ users group. And then the bar kind of got a bit of not very great for conversations after COVID. So because of that, there wasn't really a lot of opportunity for Walter and I to talk about D specific stuff. Walter sent me an email but he formatted it in Markdown. I just recall reading this email going, these are all great ideas. I'd love to see this. Hey, Walter, this is Markdown. How about we just put this up on GitHub and people can start making PRs and we can open the discussions tab and they can start posting their ideas for what they want to do. And he's like, great, go for it. We put it up there. I did an announcement post on the forums about it and said, hey, look, we're talking about this, we're talking about building another Phobos. Here's the ideas that Walter had. And I think I had a couple ideas that I added in there. So, and it's like, what do you all think? And then boom, ideas everywhere. I think there ended up being something like 30 different ideas posted to the discussions forum. We rolled a bunch of stuff into the design document that eventually became more than one document. At least early on, I saw myself almost more of a secretary, just taking notes, managing the conversations and PRs. And then, it was December of 2023. Walter says, you know what? You're it. No.
Well, that's how it works. Yeah. I mean,
right.
You step up for something and next thing you know, you're something else.
Yeah. That's pretty much how it happened. And it was the December. It was while we were having the big fight over interpolated expression syntax or sequences. And Walter wanted to talk about something else because Bruce and I had spent the past 3 months just wearing him down on this. He finally he finally agreed
Right.
to merge it, and it so and then it was like, oh, we can talk about something else, and so it's like, I want to talk about Phobos. Okay, you're gonna do it. I mean, I guess I don't really see myself as the primary developer, and the reason for that is I don't actually consider myself to be the best programmer for the job. If you want to work on higher level libraries like a SQL library or an HTTP library or something like that, I'm really good at that kind of stuff. But when you need to work at the very core of the system, things that are going to get called thousands upon thousands of times in hot loops, my brain I watch these guys work. I'll watch somebody like JMD work, or Paul Backus, or Dennis. Dennis is amazing. um, I'll watch them work and I'll go, I do not get your guys' brains. Glad I have them around to lean on, but I don't get it. Library design, and sort of, I have a lot of opinions about how to design the library, but and I know that there's going to be a lot of people saying, well, you know, you're not the right person for the job. And I'll just go, yeah, you're right. I'm not.
Nobody is. That's the thing. I mean,
yeah.
we are a collection of people who are not the right people for the job. We're the only people for the job. That's it. Until somebody else comes in who is,
Well, and I think the thing that's been helpful is having been in the community since 2011, going to the DConfs that I was able to get to, having the relationships that I had going into this project. Like when JMD started talking about all his ideas for ranges, I was like, oh, so you're the range guy.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
It turns out ranges are pretty much the first thing you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not quite the first thing, but they're the first useful thing. He's and I have to give props to him. He's got the traits library, st.traits, the new one in Phobos 3. Y'all should go check it out. Way better documentation. The traits actually make more sense. And one of the big things that we're going to be focusing on in version 3 is getting names consistent. One of the things that I learned from working with .NET for as long as I did is that the consistency of the library is absolutely crucial to people being able to use it. Walter finally agreed. I took me over a year to convince him to let me change the names on some things, and we're gonna make some people mad doing this.
Can you give an update? Where are we at right now? What's the state of things?
So the general plan is we're going to be kind of quiet as we get ranges done, because once we get ranges done, there's a universe of work that opens up. I've been trying to do other things in the meantime to kind of help Phobos along. So we did a huge PR cleanup back in BeerConf September, I think, of 2024. It was October. So I mean, we merged like 10 PRs. We deleted like 60 of them. It was, but one of the things that I found doing that was people got interested in Phobos again. And now we have people showing up with new things. I've got one from Paul Backus here about a procedural API for some type that we need to get some review work done on. There's a new fellow who I haven't seen before. So shout out to the new people. Incrementator is his GitHub handle. He's showed up and he's gotten a couple merged already. And one of the complaints that I had seen on the forums for years and years and years is that, well, Phobos is stagnant and it takes forever to get things through the review process. And I'm just going to take that complaint off the table. We're going to start. Does it pass CI? Yes. Okay. So it doesn't break anything. I'm just going to merge stuff. And so I went in, I just started merging stuff. Really, the point of that activity was to show people that, well, okay, that may have been true. I'm not actually sure that it was, but it was like, no, we're doing stuff here. And part of that is because we knew we were going to have to be quiet with ranges, because there's really not much we can do until they're done. And also it gave us an opportunity to come back into the community and say, hey, look, no, we're serious about this.
There are people out there who probably would like to contribute to D in some way, but the compiler isn't the most user entry level friendly way of going about it. So, if somebody were looking to pitch in with Phobos, what would be the best way to do it right now?
The best way to do that is actually please comb through the old bugs. Part of the process that we're using for Phobos 3 is that we are porting over Phobos 2 code. We're not rewriting everything from scratch. A lot of people asked us to with Phobos 3, and we just said, look, that is way too big a project. We're not going to do that. In fact, some of the traits that we have are just straight ports. I think I did the first one was like std.compiler. std.compiler is a straight just, okay, verify that the docs are in good condition. And then that goes over in that particular module. There's going to be some modules where we look at that module and we go, thumbs up. Okay. All modules are getting audited for auto decoding and for naming. We're always going to take a look at those two. We're always going to take a look and see, are there unit test cases that we're not covering right now that we should be covering? But when you fix a bug in Phobos 2, you're actually doing work for Phobos 3. Mm-hmm. So on my list of things to do is typecons.nullable. There's about 8 outstanding bugs on that. So one of the things that when we do our audit and for porting is we're going to take a look at those bugs and say, can we fix any of these as we're moving it across? But if you fix it in Phobos 2, that fix will make it to Phobos 3. I mean, okay, so, bug fixes scare you and bug fixes are hard. You just want to do something new. We actually talked about this at DConf last year. If people want to bring new file formats, TOML, YAML, bring an SDL. I personally love SDL. I know people hate it in the D community.
SDLang, not SDL, the multimedia library.
SDLang. Yeah, sorry. .SDL is the file, so I always think of it as SDL. SDLang, yes. So if you want to bring SDLang into the language, I personally love it. Dub and Redub can use that library straight up. Phobos, they wouldn't have to do an import. For build tools in particular, that's important because build tools, I do believe Dub can bootstrap itself now. But for build tools, you have to do this bootstrapping thing where if it's in the standard library, you don't. It's just there. I also view the standard library as key to making it easier for us to improve our build tools chain or build tools. So that's like when I look at all the different things that I would love to do with D, the standard library sits at the center of it. I mean, my opinion, the language itself, modulo actual bugs, is good. It's stable. I don't encounter problems with it anymore. Yes, I understand that if you go out and play at the edges of the compiler, you start turning on experimental switches. Yeah, okay, you're going to have problems. But I don't mess with any of that stuff. So in my day-to-day production stuff. So the language itself is really, really good. Yes, I would really love to get async await. Shout out to Ricky for putting that dip together because I use async await as if it's breathing air in C# now. But like people say, oh, you've got to get this into the language. There's things about the language that could be added or improved. But in my mind, right now, the biggest leverage that we have is getting a standard library out there that can handle a much broader array of tasks like web, like database, like that could even better support games. And in some cases, even better support no GC type work. And the better C guys are sitting there going, yay! When I say that. Nothing has changed since my talk at DConf last year. There will be parts of Phobos that are not going to be at no GC. That's another one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to do our best to make sure that the core bits of the library that you use every day at least have, where possible, have no GC alternatives.
Very cool. And Adam, I could go on talking for another hour, but we've gone over an hour by quite a bit already. It went by fast.
Yeah, I see that.
So before we end it, do you have any parting thoughts?
I honestly see the future of D as brighter now than it was 10 years ago.
And that's not a pun.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not. Um, because we were talking about DConf 2013, 2014, and how the future seemed really bright for
Mm,
D then. I would say it's even brighter now. Uh, the world is going to need languages that are energy efficient and human capital efficient. I did a little lightning talk at D last year, and I want to repeat this year, where I said there are 27.3 million programmers in the world, and we're scheduled to start losing programmers just on the basis of age. They're just aging out
mm,
for the next 20 years. Languages like D that allow you to solve problems quickly in an environment where every computation matters. This AI environment where we're just melting down really expensive AI accelerators for just trying to get as much computation through as we can. Sorry, Rust guys, it isn't you. I love the ideas you've brought to the table, but I see D as the future language because it crosses efficiency of programmer time with efficiency of compute time.
That is an awesome thought, and I'm happy to hear it. All right, Adam. Thanks so much for joining us today, for giving us your time.
Yeah.
And I will see you at the next monthly meeting, which isn't too far off.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Take care.
All right. You too. Bye.